Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so since Wesley is not actively playing at the moment in a major tournament, I decided I would go back in time and grab a game from the Skilling Open, where, as you guys know, he did win. So I figured that'd be a little good spot to go back to. So I just got a game that Wesley and Magnus Carlsen did play with each other in that one, and that is taken from round 5, and it is game 1. Yeah, as I always say, I appreciate you guys stopping by and watching my stuff subscribing. Appreciate that very much, guys. If there's anything else that you think that I can do to improve my channel, to make things more interesting, feel free to let me know. I'm always very open to suggestions. But to all my people in the Philippines, kamusta, maraming salamat for coming by. Appreciate it very much. I need to learn some Norwegian, so that's on my to-do list. I'll go ahead and make sure I write that down. But as always, at the end of the video, I have those chess puzzles for you. So if you want to stick around for that, I got you. But if you guys are ready, let's go ahead and take a look and see what we have for this game. All right, so we have a d4, knight to f6. So we got c4, e6. I'm just going to kind of run through these moves. This is all pretty standard theory. We have, queen's pawn. So we have knight to f3, d5. So we have the queen's gambit on the board. So we have knight to c3. We have c5. Even though this is pretty standard stuff. The Semi-Tarrasch c5 is a much rarer line. It's about 5th or 6th on the list. You have like the Slavs. You have, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is the Ragozin, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, you have Queen's Gambit accepted. Queen's Gambit accepted. And just, just all standard stuff, Bishop B7, stuff like that. So we do see pawn takes D5, pawn takes D4, queen takes D4. We have pawn takes E5, and then we do have the E4 variation. And so we have pawn takes E4, pawn takes D8, queen takes D8, and we do have knight to G5. Of course, pretty clear threat. You're trying to, fork this king and this rook. So really the only way to defend against that is either going king here or bishop here. This pawn at some point most likely is going to be gone, so you're not really too much worried about that. So we do have bishop to e6, and after knight takes e6, you have pawn takes e6, and you have bishop to c4. Basically your whole goal as white is to try to attack any of the weaknesses that black has in their position, and right now they have this doubled pawn situation in the middle. So they're just trying to attack that as much as possible here. So we do have king to e7. We have castles, knight b to d7. And we have bishop to e3. We have rook to c8. Very logical. I mean, of course, we have this undefended bishop on c5 or c4. We're trying to get the rook onto this is a completely open file. Another file, of course, would be this one as well. But, this move actually comes with tempo. So we got to take care of that somehow. So we got bishop back to b3. And we have knight to c5. And then we have the novelty of the game, which is bishop takes c5. Now, if we back up in this position, we've also seen rook f to e1. It was in a different move order, but rook f to e1 did come, and that did allow knight takes b3 and pawn takes b3. Which is, it's not horrible, but it's, it does attack some points in black's position. It gives, white an open file here, but, these double pawns are a little bit unsightly. So going back, like I said, we did have bishop takes c5, and of course we have rook takes c5, and we have rook f to e1. So we have a pretty similar situation from, compared to what I showed you, except for, this structure is better, and this bishop is preserved. So going back, so we have g6. And so, like I said, eventually one of the pawns we're going to drop. So the e4 pawn does drop. So knight takes e4. We have knight takes e4, rook takes e4. We have e5, trying to shut down this, of course, this, take on e6 with check. So we have f4. We have bishop to g7, and we have rook a to e1. So rook comes to f8. We have pawn takes e5. Rook to f5, and we have e6. So most logically, the bishop is going to take on b2. And so as you guys can see, We do have material equality. We have we have 4 pawns for black, and we have 4 pawns for white. Oops, bam, messed that up. And we have 2 rooks each, and we do have the opposite colored bishops. So if we were to get into an endgame where the rooks were traded off, we would have an opposite color endgame, which would most likely be a draw. So we do have rook to d1, and we have rook to c7. Now, if you want to go ahead and pause the video real quick and see what white's move is here, what the best move for white is. It's a pretty multi-purposeful move. But we'll see if you can go ahead and spot that real quick. All right, cool. So one of the things that you should notice in the position is the fact that if this rook doesn't hold this file, this bishop has the ability to check the king, and then this rook on this file is making sure that the king can't come back this way. So you have possible back rank mate issues, even though the king is not in the corner. If you don't get this king some room to breathe, create some luft, then it's going to be stuck, possibly in a back rank mate situation. So the move is actually g4, and what that does, number one, is it puts this pawn on a light square. It also comes with a tempo, attacking the rook, and it allows the king to step up onto a light square. And it basically just alleviates all the back rank mate issues. We're all good to go. So the rook comes to f8, and so we have king to g2, like I was saying. And then we have b5. We have rook to e2, giving a counter attack on this bishop over here. And so we have bishop to c3, and we have rook to e3. And now, if we were to make, so there's an idea, there's a definite idea behind rook to e3, and it's kind of subtle. It definitely takes a little bit. Get this here. Come on, get clear. Okay. It does take a little bit of I guess experience to kind of know the idea behind this, because like I said, it is pretty subtle. So if we were to just make kind of like a random move for black. Something that kind of would seem like it was a strong move. We might make something like a5, just getting a little bit expansion on the king side. But unfortunately, that would actually fail because you have the ability to deflect this rook away from the protection of this rook, and that is with rook to d7 with check. And so the problem with the situation is once this rook takes and this pawn takes, it is coming with a check. And so you're going to be able to pick up this bishop. So if we just run through a variation, like I said, rook would take d7, the pawn would take d7, and you don't have time to retreat the bishop out of the way because now you are checked by the rook. And so you would, most logically take on d7, and then you would actually be winning a piece. So it's subtle. It's not something that's just like, super direct. But like I said, we do have bishop comes to d4, just sidestepping all of that stuff. So, Wesley, so it's like, I don't want to see any of that. So we see rook e to d3. We have a5. Now a5 is fine. We have rook to d7 with check. Rook takes d7. Rook takes d7 with check. And then we have king down to f6. We have rook to b7, and we have a4. And so now you see a little bit later implications of this pawn. Come on, bro. Come on. Let's go. Really? Thank you. Okay. All right. Anyway, we do see the implications of this pawn a little bit later. As far as it going to g4, now it has the ability to deflect the king over with g5. So we see king takes g5, and we see rook takes b5 with check. And this is a very crucial part in the game because it's fairly even. It's pretty dead even here. And you're pretty much just going to go into a pretty drawn rook type of endgame. But there is an opportunity for a mistake. And unfortunately, that's what Wesley so does. He has the ability to, move king to f6 is the best possibility. You also have king to h6. So you have multiple moves that you can make. But unfortunately, Wesley so does make rook to f5. And the unfortunate thing about rook to f5 is it actually forces a win. And so the win is actually rook takes b4. And then so we see pawn takes b3, and then we see e7, and we don't have the ability to move the rook here. This is a kind of a nice little tactic that you have because the rook does not have the ability to come behind this pawn and protect. Because after rook to b5, the rook is pinned now to the king, and so there's not a possibility for you to try to take this this pawn, and that's going to deflect the rook. So after something like this, you would have the force of this here, and then you would also be taking with check. So you don't even have time to capture, you know, this pawn here like this. So that's the unfortunate thing about where the rook is actually placed on f5. So that's the reason why rook to f5 was one of the worst moves, because it does protect the king, but it also allows this type of situation to go on. So like I said, we did have pawn takes b3, e7, we have pawn takes a2, we have queening on e8, we have queening on a1, but like I said, unfortunately, this does force a mate. And so there's so many different mate possibilities here. So we'll go into the details of it. So we have in the game we have queen to e7 with check. The king comes to h6. We do have rook to h4, and the king is now in a complete forced mating net. It's pretty much like mates in 3s and 4s and stuff like that coming up. And there's not a lot that black can actually do to fend off this mate. So we see rook to h5, which is the only move. We see queen to f8, which is the only move. And we do see queen to g7, which is one of 2 only moves. Now, if we were to pick the other move, which would be king to g5, that would be automatically mating. So that would just be a mate in 1. So going back to what we had, we did have queen to g7, but that also allows a forced mate, and which is a queen to f4. Check, and that forces g5 because, you know, this rook is pinned to the king, it can't move. So we see g5, queen comes to d6 with check, forces the queen down with g6. So as you see, the king is starting to become like in a position where he has only moves. There's only 1 or 2 moves usually in these forcing lines. So we see queen come back to f8. After queen to g7, we have rook takes h5. And it is in this position that Wesley so unfortunately resigns, because if you were to do something that would seem like it actually saved, actually saved the position, it would be rook to g6. But you also have rook takes g5 with check, and it's the same similar idea. It's a deflection. And then after, you know, the king would come back to h6, you'd see queen to g7 with check. And the only other alternative, of course, would be just to take the rook directly. And then you would be doing, it's more of the same type of stuff. But like I said, after rook takes h5 and coming to g6, I mean, you see this a lot in games when you have the king right sitting next to the queen. You usually have the ability to deflect the queen either this way, where it's just a direct take, or after moving over. You know, it's just a similar type of situation. So remember that in your games, if you do have, if somebody has their king next to their queen, sometimes you have possibilities to try to deflect the queen away and put it in these types of situations where if the king does move, you know, it's facing just losing the queen altogether. So that is that. So going to these chess puzzles I have for you, this one, and it was a deflection. And so the move is bishop to b6. Now bishop to b6 forces the queen away, but as you can see, you have a like a hidden checkmate on g7 if you can force this queen away from this this rank. So the queen has to maintain the rank. So you see queen to b7, and after rook takes c4, knight takes c4, knight to h6 with check, and we have pawn takes h6. We have knight to e7 with check. The king comes down to f7. We have queen to g8 check. King takes on e7. We have queen takes h7 with check. The king comes down to e6, and we do have queen takes b7. After knight takes b6, we have queen takes b6. This is a very nice position for white. If you did have a situation where you did take with the queen here, you would see knight takes f8, and after queen back to c7, you would just be blocking, and it'd be more of the same type of situation. And so the next one I have for you guys is this one here, and it is actually a discovered attack, and it's the easy one. If you are familiar with a certain type of checkmate, you should see it. And I will actually put that checkmate down in the description for you. But I appreciate you guys stopping by, and I'll see you guys next time.